Yes. Judge Griffith, I'm going to give you a chance to talk about an op-ed that you wrote afterwards, in which you said that why you thought adding members was a bad idea. You know, part of it is, as you know, that all of the conservatives on the Supreme Court now were nominated by Republican presidents. All of the liberals were nominated by Democratic presidents. That probably sounds to most people like it makes sense, but that it wasn't that way for a very long time on the Supreme Court. So take that into account when you talk about why you think now would be a bad idea to add justices.
Sure, sure. Well, first of all, Professor Rodriguez did a good job explaining the opposition to it. Let me go take one step back and maybe frame this in a little larger view. And I think there's a fundamental disagreement among some of the commissioners about the role of the Supreme Court under the Constitution, and those of us who opposed expansion, at least I oppose expansion, start with the idea that the Supreme Court, although certainly not perfect, has done a remarkable job in the history of the Republic. It's the crown jewel of our constitutional government. I spent a number of years deeply involved in rule of law projects in former communist countries, and everywhere I'd go and meet with reformers, they look to the federal judiciary and the Supreme Court as the model of an independent judiciary. I thought one of the most moving moments during our public proceedings came from an anecdote told by Walter Dellinger. Walter was the acting Solicitor General in the Clinton administration, a professor at law at Duke, and a distinguished appellate advocate and public servant. Walter told the story of how he argued for the side of the government in the Clinton v. Jones case, the case about whether Paula Jones would be allowed to proceed with her lawsuit against a sitting president of the United States. Walter argued for the government's position in the Supreme Court. He lost. That position was rejected 9-0. Walter told the story that he was in Beijing teaching Chinese law students at the time the decision was handed down. And he spoke, it was quite moving, I thought, about the astonishment that his law students greeted that opinion, that a low-level state employee could pursue a lawsuit against the President of the United States, and that the Supreme Court upheld that 9-0 was just simply astonishing to them. I tell that story because I'm one who thinks the Supreme Court is playing very well its part in our constitutional system. And I worry about efforts to change that, the unintended consequences that would come from that. Now, we know that for many of the proponents of expansion, there are intended consequences. And the intended consequences are to affect the decisions of the future decisions of the Supreme Court in a way that's more to their liking. Look, I don't agree with all the decisions of the Supreme Court. I was on the panel that was overturned in Shelby County. I think the Supreme Court got that decision wrong. But I reject the idea that this Supreme Court is some part of a plan to restrict the ability of American citizens to vote, or that it has a partisan preference for one party over the other. That's just simply not true. And I worry that people who make those claims, people who make proposals for change based on some idea that the Supreme Court is not legitimate, they play into something that I think is quite toxic in our culture today, and that's this sense of distrust or mistrust. Jonathan Haidt said recently, he predicted a cataclysmic failure of American democracy because he said, we just don't know what happens when you drain all trust out of a democracy. I worry that the arguments that are made for expansion of the court assume that the court is filled with political partisan actors, and that the antidote to that is to fill it with more partisan actors. Well, that's that was not my experience in the federal judiciary. It's not filled with partisan actors. It's filled with men and women who are doing their level best to follow their oath to be impartial. They have different views about how to read the Constitution, how to read a text of a statute or a regulation, but they're not being driven by partisan concerns. And I worry that too much of the argument in favor of expanding the court buys into that fiction. It leads to distrust, and we should have, and we need to have confidence in the Supreme Court, particularly at a time when trust is diminishing for many of our governmental institutions.